Hey Kings of War fans, Utterly Spineless here, and today I'm going to be doing a complete overview of the Goblin army for Kings of War. I'm going to be talking about how I play my army, tactics involved, what's good, what's bad, what you can take. Not just my way of doing it, but different ways you can do it. I genuinely think Goblins are probably one of the most diverse armies you can play in Kings of War. You can take big hordes of troops, you can take multiple small units of troops, you can take a gun line with hordes of shooters, you can take, lots of crushing strength with trolls and giants. A very diverse army, and definitely one of the more fun to play armies. So just a disclaimer before we start, guys. One is that I genuinely think that the Kings of War game is pretty balanced. As far as tabletop gaming goes, it's about as balanced as they come. So that being said, if I say something is not worth taking, or I wouldn't personally take it, that doesn't mean I don't think it's viable. Obviously, anything can be picked, and it's up to you how you want to play your army. So please don't write things in the comments like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you said that wasn't viable," because, each to their own. You take what you want. I'm just saying what I think, having played Goblins pretty extensively since coming to Kings of War. And secondly, everything I talk about is obviously after the release of Clash of Kings, so all those rules will be taken into account, such as nerfing of breath attacks, nerfing of flyers, that kind of stuff. Okay, so without further ado, let's crack on. First off, let's look at the army special rule, Utterly Spineless. All units in this list have yellow-bellied unless specified otherwise. Now, first off, this is strange because every single army in this book has a special rule that buffs the army. Ogres have brutal, orcs have crushing strength, elves have elite. There's only one army that has a special rule that nerfs them instead of buffs them, and that's Goblins. Even when the Uncharted Empires book was released a year after this, the trend continues with every single army being buffed by their special rule, and Goblins yet to be the only ones that are nerfed. So it's quite a weird one. I don't know why Mantic did this. And yellow-bellied is a strange rule as well, because you can easily dance around it. Things like trolls and giants don't get it. Flank charges don't get it. Rear charges don't get it. And counter charges don't get it. So very often, if you're playing smart, it doesn't even come into play. I released a battle report last week against a Brotherhood army, and I didn't make a single yellow-bellied roll all game. So there's definitely ways to play around it. Having said that, you can see why when Kings of War first came along, a lot of Goblin players were playing hordes of shooters, because that kind of, you sent down the path of thinking, okay, well, I can't play a combat army because I was a 1 in 6 chance I won't make the charge, so obviously I'm going to play a shooting army. But for me personally, fielding multiple hordes of shooters, it's never really been a playstyle that appealed to me, so yellow-bellied is just one of those rules that you just deal with and hope it doesn't come up. So let's look at the infantry choices, and I'm going to deal with melee first, and sharpsticks and rabble. Now, regiments, hordes, and legions, obviously, and these guys they're pretty much exactly the same. So the only choice you've got to make is, do you want them to have phalanx or not? If you feel you're going to need phalanx and you're coming up against some thunderous charge, obviously the sharpsticks are for you. If you don't, then you may as well just go with a rabble. You're paying 20 points extra at a regiment, and you're paying, let's have a look, 30 points more as a horde, and 50 points more as a legion. So it does get expensive if you're going to play a legion to take the sharpsticks, because obviously for 50 points you could have other things in the list that I'll come on to later, maybe a Mobis pack or something. So really, are you going to be playing Thunderous or not? You do get extra attacks for the sharpsticks. Say if you would take a horde, you get 5 extra attacks. I don't really feel that's relevant though. For 5 extra attacks hitting on 5, you got 1 more hit. It's unlikely that hit is going to wound. Let's be honest, you're not taking these guys to take down anything. Their offensive capabilities are pretty much negligible. They are cheap though. They're very cheap. A horde of rabble for 125 points. That's about as cheap as it gets, to be honest. So really, tactically, your mentality with these guys has got to be you just want them to be a tar pit. In other words, you take a horde, maybe even a legion if you want to. I'll give you my thoughts on legions in a bit, but say you take a horde, a rabble, it's only costing you 125 points, and you've got 21 points of nerve before they're broken. So you maybe put them in the middle of the board, march them up, and say to your opponent, yeah, go on, crack on, charge into them. You've got to do an absolute bucket load of wounds, and even then you've got like 125 kill points out of it. That is how you want to play these guys, really. In terms of legions, guys, I don't field legions myself because I think the footprint is just too big and it becomes very difficult. As a goblin player, you're gonna have more drops than your opponent 9 times out of 10 because your units are so cheap, and that you've got more stuff, you need more room. And terrain can just really bottleneck you, and there's nothing worse than just not being able to get your hard-hitting units in because they are absolutely bottled in by this massive footprint of a legion of rabble that you've got sitting in the board. It can be really frustrating when you outplay yourself, so to speak. Now, how I fielded them in the last 2 games I've played is I've actually broken my horde of sharpsticks down into 2 regiments. It gives you an extra drop on deployment, which is a cool thing, and it makes you more flexible. And then I treat them as chaff almost, putting them in front of my more hard-hitting units, maybe like a giant or trolls, or maybe recently I've been allying in some orcs, and then I put them in front and just march them up and say, yeah, fine, you crack on, you charge those, and even if you charge them with something that's got thunderous, they're actually going to hold you up a hell of a lot more. Because, like 95 points for a regiment of sharpsticks, like I said, like you can totally negate their offensive capabilities. They're totally rubbish. But with phalanx negating thunderous, they're actually quite hard to get through because, they got 14 points before they get routed. So that's how I've been doing it. And I've actually had quite a lot of success with it in the last 2 games. In terms of unlocks, though, if you need to run hordes to get some unlocks for army composition, then there is a way around that, and that's trolls. But I'll get into that later. A lot of armies are kind of like stuck with their infantry choices that they have to say, oh, okay, well, I need to field a horde of infantry because I want to unlock the good stuff. But that's not a problem goblins suffer with, I reckon. So, Spitters next, and let's be honest, they are what they are, and you don't need me to tell you about these guys. I take them in a horde. I don't think I'd ever run these guys in a regiment. You're hitting out 10 shots in a regiment. It's really not worth it, man. Just take a horde, yeah, and then you can take a wizard with Bane chanting behind them if you want to do all that. But obviously that's a lot less effective since Clash of Kings come out. But you can take, Jar of the Four Winds. You can put Elite on these guys if you want to get some really dirty shooting up. Yeah, it's shooting. It is what it is. It's goblin shooting. If you want to play goblin shooting, play goblin shooting. So, on to Mobis Packs. Man, these guys are absolutely cool. Probably one of my favourite units in the whole army, really. Just for the fluff and just they look cool. First thing to point out is they are actually cavalry. But I think they kind of fill a more of an infantry role. They're only speed 6, which isn't huge. Most cavalry is speed 8 minimum, so I wouldn't quite say they fulfill a role as cavalry. But speed 6 nimble means I treat them as fast infantry more than anything. I don't really take these guys in troops because at a nerve of 9/11 and defense 3, they can be picked off by, just like one lightning bolt or one hit of shooting, and these guys are wavering. So a regiment is, I feel, better for these guys, and it's what I tend to field them in. And they can be deceptively strong, man. 12 attacks, and they do have crushing strength, and they have vicious as well. So you can treat these kind of like chaff if you want to put them in front of your line, because they are dirt cheap. You can get a regiment for 95 points, that's dirt cheap. So you can treat them like chaff if you want, but just like pretty vicious chaff, right? There's a lot more wounds than your opponent is expecting. Or you can just take them as units in their own right, and maybe put them out on your flank because because that speed 6 nimble means they can get around. I genuinely feel that nimble is probably one of the most underestimated rules in the game. It's so handy to have, especially on things with high speed. Yeah, so hitting on 3s, 12 attacks with crushing strength and vicious, these guys can prove pretty deadly. Tactically though, how I fielded these guys in the past, I've taken 2 regiments and then put them with a whiz with Bane Chant and Inspiring Talisman. And that Inspiring just helps solve the problem of their like ridiculously low nerve. And not only that, a cheeky Bane Chant gives them crushing strength 2, and they can deal a lot more wounds than your opponent is expecting. And you know, even if they get killed, they're 95 points. So it's kind of like your opponent is like, they feel they have to commit resources to them, but at the same time they know that there's not a lot of points in them at the same time. So they're quite good like that, I think. Yeah, a big fan of these guys. Magic items, nah, I don't think you get any value for money here. When you're paying 95 points for a regiment, you don't really want to be sticking, like, say, a 25-point magic item on them because, you know, it doesn't make sense points-wise. Oh, and just something else to note is these guys tend to have a massive target on their back for shooting. Anything of defense 3 is so, like, subject to anything that's piercing 1, you know, things like lightning bolts or crossbows. Just because you're wounding them on 2s, and you know, when you play, you're looking for defense 3 stuff, especially in like turn 1, you move up and you're like, oh, what can I shoot? You want to be like, you know, doing wounds straight away. So these guys are going to get shot at. I'd expect that. Don't field them thinking they're going to be like the best things in the world. If they die off in the first turn or the second turn, just you know, tell yourself, okay, they were only 95 points each and they soaked up some good shooting, so move on. Okay, and that brings us on to our cavalry choices, and we've got 3 in Goblins: Fleabag Riders, Fleabag Rider Sniffs, and Fleabag Chariots. I'll come on to Chariots in a later, but let's just talk about Fleabag Riders for starters. Really good. I love these guys. They're brilliant assets to the army. The best thing about them is they are speed 10 and come with nimble, which is just amazing. They're essentially flyers that can't hop over things. Almost all cavalry in Kings of War is like speed 8, some of it is speed 9. Very rarely will you find speed 10 cavalry, and they are just brilliant. The riders, first of all, I feel these guys a lot. I think a regiment is probably where it's at for these guys. A horde of cavalry is just huge, and again, you're suffering those problems of just having a massive base size. Although, having said that, it is less of an issue with these guys because they have nimble. But still, I feel like a regiment's where it's at. And these guys have really come into their own since the release of Clash of Kings and the item Helm of the Ram. 15 points means you can take a regiment of Fleabag Riders. It's going to cost you 160 points, and you're given Thunderous 2. And that means they go from a nuisance to a legitimate threat. Park them on the flank, 20 inches movement up in the first turn, and then pivot straight away. And you can be looking at flank charges on turn 2. And, you know, 14 attacks with Thunderous 2 in the flank. That's, like, you know, 28 attacks. That's just huge. And I really like Fleabag Riders. Yeah, I field at least one of them. Sometimes I field 2. But obviously, Magic Items being unique, you can't do Helm of the Ram on both of them. So, yeah, really good. Big fan of Fleabag Riders. Nerve can be an issue with these guys because they're only 12-14, which isn't a lot really, and they're defense 4, which you know, is not a lot for cavalry. Cavalry, generally speaking, are defense 5, so they're not the toughest things, but you can definitely play around with line of sight and stuff because you've got such a massive movement and because you've got nimble. So, you know, there's ways around it with these guys, and they are great. Okay, moving on to the Sniffs though. Essentially, they're exactly the same, except they got bows. So if you want to be putting them in combat, you take the riders. If you want to be shooting, you take the Sniffs. Now, the issue I've got with Sniffs is that they drop, although they've got the range attacks, it drops them down to defense 3. And I think that's an issue with these guys. It's the same problem that the Mobis Packs suffer from. Anything that's defense 3, it's going to be, you know, anything like lightning bolts and crossbows, they're wounding them on 2s. You know, they're just going to evaporate. and goblins don't have the high nerve to deal with that. And it's not like you can say, oh, well, I'll just take Inspiring next to them, because these guys are speed 10, right? You want them whipping around the board, you want them going up flanks, you want them doing stuff like that. So you can't realistically keep an Inspiring bubble close to them. Where the Sniffs really come into their own, though, is taken in small troops. They're very good at objective-based games where you need to be picking up markers, loot tokens, things like that, or even in scenarios where you need to be in your opponent's half, for example. That huge movement and nimble allows you to do stuff like that. So they're very good for that. They're very good for taking in a game where you don't know what you're going to be playing. Something like if you're taking a list or a tournament and you think you might be coming up against a lot of these play kind of scenarios. Fleabag Riders, the Sniffs can be very good for that. It's also worth noting that nimble obviously means that they can shoot without a modifier. So they can move 10 and then shoot and then still hit on 5s, which is brilliant for the Sniffs. So they're definitely effective, the Sniffs are. It's just Riders are more my personal preference. And that brings us on to Chariots. So first things first to notice is that Chariots lose a point of speed. The Fleabag Riders are speed 10, the Chariots drop down to speed 9. Now, these guys are in a funny place, really, because they're range attack and they're melee attack. So, and I think they're probably better off being range, because they've only got, say you take a regiment. Like, first things first, I would never take a horde of Chariots. I think the base size is absolutely massive. Yeah, it's like the biggest base in the game. It's 200 millimeters deep, which means that if you charge anything, you're guaranteed to be flanked. You can be flanked by a blind zombie if you play a horde of Chariots. Yeah, but I think these guys' biggest flaw is the fact that if you take a regiment, they've only got 8 attacks. So you're paying a lot of, you're paying a lot of points in that Thunderous too. So you say you do charge them in 8 attacks hitting on 4s. You've only got 4 hits on average. Okay, so you say you I don't know, say you get 3 wounds. Like, they're not exactly a bulldozer, are they? Let's be honest. So rather than go to combat, you sit them back and, I don't know, just pepper things with shots. These guys, they lose nimble compared to the Fleabag Sniffs. So any movement and you're hitting on 6s instead of 5s. Yeah, they're a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, unfortunately. The Fleabag Chariots. Chariots can be, having said that, quite a good counter to cavalry, though, especially when you're speed 9. If you take, like, the example, you deploy opposite a unit of cavalry that's Thunderous 2, you can shoot at them, and shoot at them, and shoot at them, and then all of a sudden they come in range, and then you can just charge out, because you've got a charge range of 18, the other cavalry, say, for example, has got a charge range of 19. So you kind of like, you're shooting them the whole time, and then all of a sudden when they come into charge range, then you charge in, you do a couple of wounds, they lose their Thunderous, and you're only 110 points for a regiment of Chariots, whereas like most cavalry units are like 200, around the 200 mark, sometimes more. So they can be quite effective for that, but I just think at 110 points for a regiment, nah, I wouldn't. And that brings us on to large infantry, and there's only one choice in the Goblin army, and that is trolls. Ha! Now, I love trolls. I think these guys are awesome, like both like thematically and fluff-wise. Like, yeah, they're cool, and the models are just great as well to paint and to play with. I tend to run trolls pretty much every single time I play. Yeah, no joke. And I tend to run them in hordes as well. I just think it's a great way of putting crushing strength in your army. One thing goblins do suffer with is that they, well, death by 1,000 paper cuts, I like to say. Because we don't exactly hit hard, but we just hit a lot, Lots of shooting, lots of attacks, but nothing with crushing strength or anything like that. So trolls are a really good way to put crushing strength in. If you field them in a regiment, though, I just think for an extra 65 points, just field them in a horde. And then field 2 hordes. Yeah, they're great. 18 attacks on a horde of trolls with crushing strength 2 means, like, these guys consistently put out, like, 7, 8, 9 wounds, like, easily. every combat as well. And speed 6 is a lot, especially when you, like, you know, if you're lining up against your enemies infantry and their speed 5, you know, having that speed advantage can be very beneficial. The one thing trolls do tend to suffer with is their low nerve. Yeah, it's an issue with trolls. I think that's fair enough. They have regenerate 5, right? So they couldn't have both high nerve and regenerate. That would be a bit too strong together. So they do lose out on their nerve. I consistently get my trolls wavered. Yeah, a lot. And it can be frustrating. But, you know, I don't know. It's just one of those things. Take them next to inspiring. It doesn't have to be a troll bruiser. It can even be a flag get, you know. I think these guys do need inspiring behind them, especially if you want them to hold up to any charge. They're offensively strong, but they're not as tough as you think, with the nerve that low. And then what I find with the Troll Bruiser is if you take a character that only inspires a certain thing, you have to pair them up, and that kind of hinders you in deployment. But anyway, I'll get onto that when I discuss the Troll Bruiser. For Trolls, though, yeah, big fan of them. It is worth noting as well, one benefit to Trolls is that they aren't irregular. So taking a horde of trolls will give you loads of unlocks, and that's one reason why I never tend to suffer with army composition when I play goblins, because I consistently play troll hordes, and that means I've got a horde of trolls, and then, you know, a horde of sharp sticks. So I've got like unlocks for days. I'm never shy of, like, you know, I can play 3 war trombones, I can play 3 wizards, I can play 2 giants, you know. It's you basically you unlock all the good stuff. That's another reason why I feel trolls and hordes rather than regiments. I just think they're great for goblins. Some potentially good magic items for trolls. Banner of the Griffon is good. It solves the problem with their low wavering nerve. If you could maybe put a troll bruiser next to them, or even a flag get with Banner of the Griffon, that rallying one. It's only one, but every little helps. Blood of the Old King is a nice one. It gives them elite and vicious. It's one use only, but, you know, sometimes you make a charge and you need to be doing wounds. You need to break whatever you're hitting and then get the reform, so you don't get flanked or rear charged or something like that. And that means that Blood of the Old King can help for that. And you can guarantee, like, I'm going to hit like a truck. I'm going to do like 10 wounds minimum, because you re-roll in your ones hitting and wounding, which is nice. Brew of Haste is nice on trolls, putting them from speed 6 to speed 7. Yeah, lots of options with trolls. I'm a big fan. Did I mention I'm a big fan of trolls? Yeah, love them. Okay, so next up we've got War Engines. You've got 3 choices for the goblins. I'm just going to talk about sharp stick throwers and rock throwers together, because I feel that they both pretty much fulfill the same role, and then I'll come on to war trombones later. Now, here's my 2 cents on War Engines, guys. I feel they're too inconsistent. They all hit on 5s pretty much across the board, no matter what army you play. And that's even if you don't have cover. So, you know, 5+, the game's 6 turns long. Even if you can draw line of sight and get 6 shots off every game, you're only going to actually hit 2, right? So it's kind of like, they're too inconsistent to actually rely on, aren't they? Let's be honest. Having said that, a rock thrower, when they do hit, obviously blast d6 plus 2 with piercing 3. When they do hit, they do wounds. Yeah, so they're really good for taking down things like defense 5. You know, really elite kind of cavalry, stuff like that. Really good at taking down stuff like that, and definitely for taking down flyers and things. They're not great for shooting at individuals, obviously, because you get that -1 again. My thoughts, so I'd feel the rock thrower over the sharp stick thrower. I think that, yes, the rock thrower is more points, but it's more deadly when it does hit. The sharp stick thrower is it's got 2 attacks rather than 1, so I suppose you're twice as likely to hit. But when you do hit, it's only blast d3, whereas the rock thrower is d6 plus 2. And the rock thrower has piercing 3, whereas the sharp stick thrower is piercing 2. So the rock thrower is more effective when it actually hits. And it also benefits from the indirect fire rule. So that means you still obviously need line of sight, but your opponent just doesn't get cover. So I don't take War Engines. That's not saying I never would take War Engines, but if I did, it would be a rock thrower over a sharp stick thrower, and I'd probably field 2 instead of 1, because I think if you're twice as likely to hit with 2 as you are with 1. So you probably field 2. Yeah, and then use them to target really, really tough, obviously like a minimum defense 5, defense 6 stuff. You don't want to be targeting defense 3 stuff, because then your piercing is just wasted. So yeah, that's how I'd field them. Okay, next up, War Trombone. Now, these guys are legit. They were probably my favourite unit in the whole list, in the whole of Goblin Army. 65 points, right? Gets you a tiny little war engine that does a breath attack 12. And here's the kicker, it's piercing 1. They are just brilliant. Yeah, field them, field 2 of them, field 3 of them if you can. They're brilliant for just staying with your line. Any flyers that come over the top of your army, you can just pivot and pierce. You can move them 5 inches and then still shoot, obviously, because it's a breath weapon, so you don't get any modifiers to shoot. Breath weapons, obviously, they get cover now since Clash of Kings, but I don't think that's a big deal for these guys. 12 attacks, you're going to get 6 hits and then piercing 1. These guys wound, right? And when you feel like 2 of them, when you put them together, they're very capable of taking down some heavy stuff. They nigh on always recoup their points for me. It's worth noting that after the Goblin Army came out with the release of Uncharted Empires, Ratkins were given a war engine called a Weapon Team, and it's a breath attack 10, and it's 60 points. Now, you can upgrade it to have piercing 1, but that costs you 20 points. So 80 points for a breath attack 10, whereas Goblins are paying 65 points for a breath attack 12. Now, what that suggests to me is that Mantic feel that they have significantly undercosted the War Trombone, and I think every Goblin player knows it. That's why they play them. Tactically, though, how are you going to play your War Trombones? Now, obviously, these guys' biggest weakness is that they've only got a range of 12, so they need to be up in your face to do damage, right? And that combined with the fact that their nerve is 8-10, like 8, and they're wavering, which means that like any cheeky shooting attack, even like, I don't know, something like a long range attack from a character, just put 1 wound on these guys and you're likely to waver them, which can be very frustrating. So if you know your opponent's got range attacks, tuck them behind your line and advance them up the field with your line. Just keep them in cover. That's how I play mine anyway. Okay guys, this video is getting pretty long now, so what I'm going to do is leave it there and call this for part 1. I hope you enjoyed, guys, and if you did stay to the end, thank you very much, but please click on part 2 where I will be discussing monsters selections, some good ones for Goblins, particularly love Giants. So monsters, we've got heroes in terms of like range heroes and melee heroes, and then obviously casters and characters as well, so please stay tuned.